Okay, so we've started. Thank you, Dani, for sticking onto the camera. So, when we talk about conditionals, we think first conditional, second conditional, third conditional. That's the typical approach. Then there's zero conditional, but that's something, I call it zero difference. You have present, present. That's it. If it's cold, you start to sweat. That's zero conditional. Then there's the real conditional, that is first conditional. If you study, you will probably pass the exam. Then there's the unreal conditional, that's the second. If you already had a C2 level, then you wouldn't be here, right? This is when things start to complicate a bit, because you start to forget whether you should use past simple or where you use past simple, where you use would or should, and so on. Just remember that you express a second conditional. Any conditional is made up of two things that have nothing to do with grammar. That's a condition and a consequence. I like to think about conditionals like this. So in first conditional, you have a real condition if you start, and quite a real or probable consequence. You will pass the exam. In unreal conditional, you have unreal condition. If you had a C2 level, you wouldn't be here. They are you can't clearly distinguish whether they refer to present or to future. They're somewhere floating in between present and future, right? If you had a C2, you wouldn't be here. And then there's the third conditional with a past condition and a past consequence. They are both situated in the past. If I had known you were coming in the past, 2 hours ago, I would have bought more beer, right? Both the condition and the consequence are in the past. Apart from that, you need to be aware of the grammatical structure. Third conditional is made up from a past perfect condition, if I had known, and then there's not a specific name, but it's built with models in the past. I would have bought, or would plus perfect infinitive. Remember the perfect infinitive, it's all over the place. So I would have bought more beer. And so far so good, right? Now, mixed conditionals is when you start to mix conditions and consequences from different conditionals. And if you find a good grammar book, you will see that there's like 7 or 8 types of mixed conditionals. I don't find them particularly useful for a conversation unless they are these 2 types. So, I call them, so I take as reference a sentence that always starts with a condition. If you know that you can switch positions, I would have bought more beer if I had known you were coming. But for the purpose of this discussion, let's think conditional as always starting with if. And I call this a 3 plus second, a third plus second. Why? Because after if, I have the half of the third conditional, that's the third conditional condition, and then I have the second conditional consequence. Now what I have here is a past condition, if I had listened to your advice in the past, with a present consequence. I wouldn't be in this mess now. It makes perfect sense. And you have it in Spanish as well. It's very easy. It's even easier to make than third conditional, because we usually evaluate, we assess events in the past, right? And we come to a conclusion. If you hadn't been really desperate for 5 points, you wouldn't be here, right? So you are really, really in dire need of your C1 or C2 certificate. So there's a past thing, a past condition, which determines a present or a future course of events. It makes perfect sense, but you need to have a very clear idea on how you make the conditionals grammatically speaking. So the condition in third conditional is always past perfect, and the consequence in second conditional is always would plus verb. You need to manage that. So it's very easy to make if you master the grammar and if you keep that in mind. Past condition, present consequence. That's it. Now, the other one is a bit more complicated. The example is, Jane would have left Mike by now if she didn't still love him. I always start from if, so I have if. If she didn't still love him, this is a second conditional condition, right? The past simple is used to make a second conditional condition with a consequence in the past. How is that even possible, that a present action has an influence on the past? Unless you are a fan of the Dark series, you may struggle with it. So the trick is this. Pay attention to the condition. If she didn't still love him, she loves him now, and she probably loved him in the past when she could have made the choice to leave him, but she didn't. So the trick for making the second plus third, I call it second plus third, that's present condition with a past consequence, is that this condition is not submitted to the pass of time. That is, when we are talking about a state of facts, she loves him. The most likely thing is that she loved him 3 years ago when something happened, right? Or a state of facts that's much more logical, like if I wasn't a woman, I would have gone to the army, right? But I am a woman. This is something you can't change, right? So again, it's not submitted to the pass of time. This is what we call a feature, right? It may be a physical feature or an emotional feature. If I wasn't shy, I would have asked him out yesterday, right? Now, the difficulty with conditionals in general, and when we refer to something in the past, is that you need to place that past very clearly to make sense. And they say, Jane would have left Mike by now. By now indicates that I'm referring to the past. Everything that came before the now is the past. So it has to make sense. And there's nothing else to teach about mixed conditionals, really, if you understand the relationship between condition and consequence. So you can easily make this second plus a third if you start with a feature, with something that cannot be changed. Therefore, it is true now, and it was true at the time of the consequence that I'm referring to, which is obviously past. Now, in this book, which I really love, we have some, I don't know, they're not different type of conditionals. They're alternative to the if particle, which I think it's worth bearing in mind. I'll tell you what happened as long as, or so long as you promise not to tell anyone. This is a first conditional, okay? You only pay attention to the fact that you don't necessarily use if, you can use other connectors. Provided or providing that the bank lends us the money we need, we're going to buy that flat we liked. Again, a first conditional. It sounds very fancy because it has provided or providing. How do we translate provided, providing?
Dado que.
Dado que, sí, a condición de que. They agreed to lend us the car on condition that we returned it by the weekend. Con la condición de que. I think it's a zero conditional in the past. Okay, number 2, I'm going to sell the car whether you agree with me or not. Just remember that whether in this situation cannot stand alone. You need or not at the end. Even if I get the job, I'm going to carry on living with my parents for a while, even if it's very emphatic. We're going to come across this when we discuss emphasis. Incluso sí. Supposing you lost your job, what would you do? That's an interesting construction. I think we'll see it again. Suponiendo que. And you can find the alternative of suppose you lost your job. End of sentence. That means I'm challenging you to tell me what you would do, but I don't need to finish the sentence. I could say, suppose you lost your job. And maybe you will come across this situation in the exam. Maybe the examiner will come at you and say, suppose you earned 1 million euros. Don't wait for the rest of the sentence, okay? It is a question. It's a challenge. And then we have the interesting inversion, which we will always also study further on. Had I known that you were coming, I would have bought a bottle of wine. This is the third conditional. You only switch the subject and the auxiliary. There's more inversions of this kind and more alternative. There's the second conditional expressed by were I to be a man, I would walk around on my motorcycle all day long. Were I to be, that's the verb to be, were, plus the infinitive, to be, it replaces if I were a man. You just invert again and you use the full infinitive, were I to be. But that's it. There's no more philosophy, and you shouldn't feel overwhelmed because there's so many mixed conditionals. Yes, you can basically mix all the conditionals with all the conditionals, but sometimes they don't make that much sense or they don't apply very coherently in a conversation. So just remember this. Past condition, present consequence, everlasting conditional state of facts with past consequence. If you know that, you can do anything with mixed conditionals. This is what the examiner might challenge you to use. End of story.